So let's head into our second session, which is care for the caregiver.
You may think that what we've just gone through is the most critical. I share with you that what we're about to do is equally as critical. It's these two are twins in terms of their need, their essential need to ensure that the people we're supporting are going to live to be all they can be. Because if we do not get our care taken care of the way we need to, so that we can be present, we can be unconditionally caring and compassionate, emotionally self-regulated, the people who we are supporting are going to struggle as a result of it. There's this phenomenon in science that's known as emotional contagion. It means that if I feel calm and I'm in your presence, you'll be more likely to feel calm. If I am feeling fearful, you're more likely to feel fear. And supporters have no idea how much we influence the well-being of the people we're supporting just with our own moods and whatever else. And it's not just about our behavior. People we're supporting have got senses beyond what we understand as some of the gifts that they bring that we will likely never see because we're so dependent on these seven senses operating quote normally. And I share with that what we need to do is ensure that right inside of us that we are present, that we are calm. And yes, act as if you have to, but the essence of what a relationship's going to be will come from the authenticity that we can say, yeah, I am authentically calm and caring at this time. So we're going to bring you some tools on how to do that. And we could just start that off then, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Just the next slide then, if you would. So I talk when we begin here about the 4 outs that we supporters can be subject to unless our self-care is adequate. Burnout is the one that most of you will be very familiar with. Freak out, which is kind of an outside expression of burnout, if you will. Then the untrained caregiver. Good caring people have their own self-medication way, if you will, of not burning out and freaking out, and that is to tune out. We become indifferent, professionally warm, cognitively caring, whatever you want to call it. It's the tuning out. Some supporters can even make a badge of honor out of it. Say, "Oh, I'm a professional. I don't get too involved with people I'm supporting." Well, we're not talking about crossing boundaries of dependencies and all of that, but in terms of how we can best work to prevent tune out, we're going to show you the third alternative, okay? And builds on space out is one of the major problems. Being mindless is what space out's about. So those are the 4, and the outs continue. You can see how they manifest, and you're right to these: annoyed, impatient, argumentative, frustrated, restless, just unforgiving, overwhelmed, all up to including anger and even rage. So that's how it manifests often. So let's see what to do about it. We have this little model, the next slide, and if you would, Jane, this little model that we're going to pull this together with, we've got there'll be a lot more on the site with this model, but this is our basic model. If you were to ask, okay, so what's it about? I mean, how am I going to manifest the best me so that the people I'm supporting or any of my relationships, because this session we're talking about here is useful for your role as a parent, but also as an adult child, as a partner, as a sibling, as a friend, parent, any one of them. So people ask, so I want to self-express in the best possible ways. Well, many of you that maybe have gone to self-help books, and there's excellent self-help books, I'm not knocking that, but the books that just give you instructions and do this and do that, I'm going to suggest are going to have less sticking power. They're going to have less impact, because to really be a good self-expression, that's going to come from optimal self-management. Unless you learn how to manage yourself, this is your ego and your inner self, you're going to struggle to really express yourself in optimal ways. And of course, that's what compromises the relationships. And we suggest that it'll be self-understanding that's going to promote optimal self-management. Once again, self-management, you just don't learn 10 rules about self-management, do it. Self-understanding is really critical. And at the base of this pyramid, this mindful emotional self-regulation, this is the foundation of self-understanding, which leads then to good self-management, which leads then to an optimal self-expression. So that's the model we're going to take you through in the hour that we've got to work with this. And like I say, it's Joanne and I have written a book on this, but for this is a great start, and we're going to give you some of the highlights today. Okay, so the next slide then, Jane. So the first point we make is this: we are working with a brain architecture that is tens and tens of thousands of years old. And it's also just a day old, the stimulation that you got from the food you got yesterday. But it's also carrying systems that are wired with the amygdala, with just all kinds of organs, parts of this brain that are designed to keep us safe, keep us surviving, keep us reproducing. And we need to understand the brain itself just at a superficial level. You don't need to go deep on this. What I'm going to give you, you'll all get. This is not complicated. Let's just take you through this little exercise and show you just an important part of your brain and how it works. So put yourself in this little experiment. This little experiment's been done with thousands and thousands of folks, and so now you're going to have a chance to do it. You're in this train station, and there's a runaway train coming down the tracks. It's about to kill 4 people. That's you over there by the switch. Now, if you throw that switch, it's going to take that train off to a track where sadly it's going to kill 1 person, but the 4 people will be saved. Now, it's the only option you've got. You can't shout or yell or anything else. We're just asking you to make a choice here. Would you throw the switch or not? So the research shows like this. After a little deliberation, over 90% of you would say, you know what, switch, I hate to cause the death of 1 person, but inaction is also a decision and is also action. And I'm saving 4 people, 3 people. It's like a math situation. Give us the next slide then, if you would. So you're in the same situation now, although this time you're not a switch. The train's going to kill 4 people still, but you're in a water tower over top of the tracks, and there's a person in front of you. And if you push that person to their death, that's going to derail the train and save the 4 people. So now you're asked the same question. Would you push that person to their death? And give yourself 15, 20 seconds, whatever. The research says this: in less than a minute, we decide to totally change our stance and not kill somebody by pushing them and let the train go through and kill the 4 people. So people ask, why would this be? Why would, and I suspect most of you were saying, no way, I can't push anybody like that. So let's just show the next slide, and I'll show you what happened when I gave you that little exercise. Back to this picture that we showed you in the earlier presentation. First of all, a really important point to understand is when people do this exercise, they do it in a functional MRI, which means we're actually seeing activation of electromagnetic energy, what's happening in the brain. And when we ask you this first question, the part of your brain, that gray part, the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, lit up. This is a working memory. This is impulse control. This is a number of things in the logistics, planning, the likes of that. And immediately when you were asked that question, that lit up. But when we asked you this second question, this is without you giving permission of any kind. The you who's listening to me did not do what I'm just about to share with you what your brain did. Your brain on its own activated the medial prefrontal cortex. Because the closer that we get personally to a situation, the more the medial prefrontal cortex acts. Okay, so if it's indirect, if it's indifferent, it's a math problem, whatever, you don't have the same activation in the medial prefrontal cortex. And you can see that is what really works to modulate the amygdala, which is the firing pin of the freeze, fear, flight brain sector, right? So just go to the next slide, if you would, Jane, and just populate that. So you saw these from the last slide that we showed you. These are all things that the medial prefrontal cortex is responsible for: empathy, insights, intuition, fear modulation, all of that. This is what that part of your brain does. And it activated without your permission. It's very significant to know that. This is consensus of neuroscience. There's no doubt about this. So what does that mean? It means that the more that we can grow and activate this part of the brain, the greater likelihood is we're going to be emotionally balanced, attuned communications, body regulation, or the body that sets us off into emotional hijacks. And the number one way that research is showing us to grow that part of your brain is through mindfulness meditation. Now, there's other ways to grow it, but this has been researched to have significant power. We're talking within 20 minutes a day for 2 weeks, there actually is increase in cortical thickness in that part of the brain, which is really powerful, right? So we're going to teach you how to do that. Next slide, if you would. So when the MPC is activated, is low, the amygdala, the outs, if you will, of happiness, dysregulation are high. So it's kind of like a teeter-totter. So the more we can grow that part of the brain, the more regulation we're going to have. Next, Jane. So we won't go into this in detail. We do a lot on the site with it, but just to let you know that the best neuroscience I've been able to cobble together goes like this. We are a combination of primitive predispositions, which I just shared with you around the amygdala and cortex and the likes of that. We're also part of our nurturing self. That's kind of what scientists call the nature self. The nurturing self is what you learned about being in the world. I must, I should, I ought to, all those that you learned up to around the age 12, 14 mainly. And then there's these prime prompts that are just the cultural, societal brainwashing, if you will, in terms of what also directs, some of our decisions, right? It's interesting, there's an experiment in the brain priming. You're in an MRI and they ask you to tell which bottle of wine is better, and you get to sip of a $90 bottle of wine and you sip out of a $10 bottle of wine, and you're asked, which was the best for you? And you'll say, well, the $90 bottle was best. You're in an MRI, right? When you sipped, first of all, both bottles of wine were the same and they tricked you. They said you're drinking out of a 90 now. When you thought you were drinking out of a 90, it was bogus. It wasn't true. They tricked you. When you thought you were, your brain, dopamine receptors, the pleasure principles increased. So even your brain was fooled by these brain primings. And there's a number of advertisers use brain priming all the time to get us to buy things. Anyway, just populate that slide then, Jane. And this is who we are. This is what we have. As I said, we're beautiful spiritual beings, but what drives the show is PFPism. And I'd suggest to you that we are in this semi-conscious state, mindless mind, and underneath it is this PFP, subconscious programming, okay? Next slide then, Jane. So just populate that slide. Just to understand a little bit about consciousness. When you were asleep last night, I'm going to call that being unconscious. The way you drove your car, the last time you drove your car, when you're kind of put the key in the ignition and you end up in the parking lot someplace, that's what we call being semi-conscious. It's being mindless. You're someplace, but your mind is either in the future or the past. That's how most people live their life. That's why we get emotionally hijacked so readily, not knowing that we're in the present moment. Or fuller consciousness is, as an example, how you'd be driving your car if there was a police officer behind you. You see how you've got capacity to be more conscious? Just a police officer. But we can't have a police officer running around your life the whole day getting you to be more conscious. So what we do when we teach you mindfulness is you learn how to be more fully conscious, knowing not only what you're doing, but that you're doing. Each of you right now become aware that you're listening to me. So continue to listen to my words. Know that you're doing it. I've just doubled your consciousness in this moment, knowing that you're here, as well as paying attention to what you're hearing. Just give us the next slide, if you would, Jane. So self-care then is kind of learning how to work with this brain of ours to a great extent. So we're going to focus ourselves and show you some neat tools, I think, and we're going to do a little exercise. But I'd just like to put this in first. Always we change can be changed. I mean, that's a given. Someone is violating someone, we shut it down. If someone's not doing their best, we motivate them to do better. We're always trying to change that which should and can be changed. We should intensify our personal care, our sleep, nutrition, exercise. Those are givens. This morning, I'm working with the biggest, most prevalent, I'd say, way that we compromise our care, and that's by not developing our inner self to understand ourselves better and acknowledging that changing conditions will only be a small part of the solution. Like, it's worth making the point, if conditions is what brought us happiness and self-regulation, we live in the top 5% of living conditions in the world. Wouldn't you think if conditions did it, that we would be much happier than we are? We wouldn't lose. I mean, relative to the other 95%, I mean, everyone wishes they lived in our part of Ontario, right? So it proves to beyond any doubt, because you weren't your A game over the last 2 weeks sometime, or even the last week or last day, there's more, and we have to do more, and that's what we're going to talk about now, okay? So next then, Jane. We're going to help you to break out of this PFP prison. Next. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of, and then the next slide, just a couple of accentuate the positive statements. These are just good little triggers to have. Now, until you're mindful, you won't be able to really effectively do much of what I'm sharing with you here. But I just want to set this menu up to remind you that once you are more conscious, you'll be more likely to be able to do these kinds of keeping yourself and your self-care higher. First one, learn to be relative to what's happening. Say to yourself, something happens, it's not that great. Yeah, this is bad, but relative to what? I'm not starving, I'm not blind, I don't have unbearable pain. So one way to keep yourself from getting emotionally hijacked into negativity is to keep your existence relative. Now, until you know and remember that you're in that moment, like once again, you may have lost it, remembering that you're in that moment, that you're listening to me, unless you can have consciousness, you won't be able to do that as much. But this is what to do when you get conscious. Calm. You can calm the PFP body by identifying 1 or 2 body sensations that are taking place when you start to get emotionally hijacked. I'm going to show you how to do that. You could say to yourself, this situation could be worse. And every one of you, if I gave you $100, could come up with a list of how something that last week really emotionally hijacked you, but you could find things that could be much worse, which is a way of calming someone. And there's even, people can say, possible benefits that come out of some horrific situations. Next slide. And then some of these others. For some people, they get relief in their not being hijacked as much by putting perspective on, this could be the last time that I'm doing this today, or the last time in my life that this happens. And that gives a bit of a, whoa, okay, so I better appreciate what I'm doing, right? And stretching limits of discomfort, celebrating successes. I say to folks, second last one, make your failures painful. This is one really important skill set. Too often we just go through life, things are bad, we blame other people, And instead of saying, I could have done more for myself. I could have watched what I'm eating. I could have done my exercise. I could have done other things. When we have moments that are less than optimal, when we've known that there's something better we could have done to prevent this, own it. Own it. Celebrate your successful. Say, wow, I was in a tough situation with someone I was supporting, and I held my presence. I was calm. We got through it in a way I wanted to always. Yes, I nailed it. But you're in that same situation, and you start to raise your voice or get impatient or a little bit sarcastic or whatever the outs on that continuum is. After it's all over, take 5 minutes and say, there's a good chance that didn't have to happen if I had done more work on myself. Own it when we fail. I know that there's lots of gurus will tell you, oh, stay positive. I'm telling you, no. I'm telling you, yeah, stay positive, but earn your positivity by acknowledging your mistakes when you make them or your failure to do what you need to do. I just shared with you 20 minutes a day of what I'm going to teach you in about 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day. And if we took MRI now in 2 weeks, your cortical thickness in the medial prefrontal cortex would be growing. That should be enough motivation for you to say, you know what? If I want to be more patient with the person I'm supporting, my kid or whatever, maybe I should get work on that. And so 2 weeks is what I'm going to be asking you to practice, what I'm going to teach you. Hopefully you will. If you don't, you can start putting back to saying, well, I should have done different there. And then being able to really active and intense awareness of the moment, which is once again, staying aware of what you're doing. Next slide, if you're Jane. So goes without saying, your nutrition and fitness, proactive to develop fulfilling relationships. I'm not going to touch some of those. They're really, really important for sure. And some of, for me, non-negotiables, having gratitude is just so important. Self-discipline, persistence. There just can't be enough said about persistence. I love the quote that I think it was Theodore Roosevelt claimed to have written. Said, I'm not a good shot, but I shoot often. I don't like the shooting of the hunting metaphor, but it's a good little reminder about how important persistence is. We may not be perfectly good, but we stay at it. We stay at it. That makes a difference in our lives, right? And then integrity. You just can't say enough about integrity. Next slide then, Jane. I'm going to have you move through this slide and the next two. We're going to cycle back to if we have time, okay? Let's go through that slide and the next two. And then give us let's start here. So now I want to teach you what I would consider to be the most fundamental of all the self-care skills. You do the things, nutrition and all that, absolutely. But this is developing your mind. And it is the mind and the mind alone that determines the quality of one's life. Never forget that phrase. Never forget that phrase. So next slide, if you would. Here's some great news. The power to influence of negative PFP programming can be significantly reduced as a result of becoming more mindful. And I'm going to show you a way that I'm going to show you 5 different steps from this to prevent your emotional hijacks. And there's a good chance, go to the slide, there's a good chance that what you're going to learn here, you will not know too much about it unless you've taken this type of a, and you're going to be quite surprised to see when I take you through the exercise about your mind and the way it works and what you can do about it. You'll be quite surprised, I'm sure. Next slide, Jane. So I like this from Martin Luther King, who just learns to not get emotional hijacked. He says, I so dislike that man. I must spend more time with him. There's a conscious person. There's a conscious person because so much of our negativity comes from anger and blaming other people. Just think of the last 3 times you were emotionally hijacked. And did your mind go into blaming something else or someone else, right? Very often it is. So we have to learn how to be with people who are difficult people and learn how to manage them, prevent them from doing harm, all of that. But what you learn when you become more conscious is you learn never to put them out of your heart. I even have a bold statement that some people are offended with initially, but after they think about it, they say, yeah, that's not bad advice. I say to people, For anyone in your life who's a difficult person, who you're struggling with, past or present, I say to you, forgive them, have mercy on you. Have mercy on you, forgive them. When you do not, when you keep a closed heart to anyone in your circle who is negative, I'm not saying that you don't do whatever you have to get to stop them from being irresponsible, from hurting, doing whatever you have to do to stop the hurt. But find a way to open your heart, because the negativity that we carry with one person goes across the board. It compromises our patience for other people. It compromises our ability to love unconditionally. It compromises a lot. So just understanding anger and the way it can really, really close us down is a big, important piece. And when we do the exercise, you're going to see how that works. Next slide, if you would, Jane. So back to developing this part of the brain that we're with you. Slide. I'll go through that slide, and then the next slide, this is where we're going to take you. What you're going to do is going to make a difference in those. So let's do the exercise. Would each of you pick up your pen right now and write your signature for me? Just take a piece of paper and your pen and write away. Okay. Now, I'd like you to write your signature again, this time with your dominant hand. This time, write it with your non-dominant hand. Let's do that now. Okay. Now, one more time with your non-dominant hand, only this time as you're doing it, say to yourself, I am aware that I am writing with my non-dominant hand. So just say those words to yourself as you're doing it. Okay, that's good. I've done that to give you a little working definition of mindfulness. So the way you wrote your signature the first time with your dominant hand, we call that a 100% mindless moment. How so? Well, every time the brain learns something, it develops a file. And you've done that 1,000 times. And so therefore, a file gets played in your head. Just like the prefrontal cortex just fired without you asking for it, the same thing happens with this file of your signature. But that's what's happening to many, many, many things that you've learned in life, that it just fires and you're mindless about it. And it's these mindless firings that are bringing us to not being as competent and caring as we could be. Now, when you wrote your signature the second time with your non-dominant, I forced you into a moment of mindfulness because I forced you to do something you weren't used to doing. The brain did not have a file on that. So you struggled. You paid attention to what you're doing, which is the first element of the 3 elements of mindfulness. The first one is learning to pay real close attention to what we're doing as we're doing it. As I say, not the way you normally drive your car, but the way you drive your car when a police officer is behind it. That's the first step of mindfulness, paying attention to what you're doing. The second way you wrote with your non-dominant, which is when I said non-dominant, but say to yourself, I'm aware that I'm writing with my non-dominant. That's the second component of mindfulness. Give us the next slide, if you would, Jane, and populate that whole slide. So the top left quadrant, we became more aware, paid attention to what you're doing. Second one, became aware that you were doing it. 2 components of mindfulness. The next slide down the bottom is the third component. I'm going to teach you how to be aware of your body sensations, your thoughts, and your feelings that are happening to you moment by moment by moment as you're involved in any action. And when you do this, as I'm going to teach you, you're going to find that these body sensations and these feelings we have, these thoughts, they don't drive us nearly the same way. And I'm going to show you how that works, and you're actually going to experience that, okay? So give us the next slide then, Jane. So I'm going to take you in a moment through a little exercise. It's 10 minutes. And I refer to mindfulness as being like a microscope. So 200 years ago, before they had microscopes, if you cut your finger, there were critters that would grow on there. And if they weren't cleaned, you'd lose your finger. When we got the microscope, we discovered the germ cell theory, medicine, and we learned we had to take care of those critters in order to save their finger. Well, those critters were always there. I mean, the microscope didn't invite those critters. It's going to be the same with mindfulness. I think today I'm going to show you a part of who you are that for the most part up to now, you won't know. And yet it drives a lot of our behavior and a lot of our feelings. And getting to know what's behind the emotional hijack. And this is not like psychologically now. What we're going to show you is how to see the building blocks of feelings, thoughts, and body sensations, and how they drive and distort who we are. So that's just the big picture of what it is. We're going to do this now. Just know that there's some people get thinking, oh, we're going to go to a trance state or something. There's no trance state. There's no hypnosis. I'm going to just ask for my instructions. I'd ask you to close your eyes when I start, only because you don't have to compete then with the visual sense door, which can be high competition. But just play with me on this. Just follow my instructions. We'll come out the other side. And for the most of you, I think I'm going to teach you something about yourself that is vital. I mean, vital to all your roles that before you maybe didn't know. So you can call me on that if I don't do it. So let's just start then do this little exercise. Just take a posture that for you is alert, but relaxed, and close your eyes. Eventually you'll do this with your eyes open, be bopping around, supporting and whatnot. But for now, just close your eyes because it's easier to learn how to do it. So the first thing I ask you to do with your eyes closed and just sitting listening to me is become aware that you're doing this. So you're just aware that you're doing what you're doing, just sitting waiting for instructions. Then I'd like you to bring your awareness to your belly and just breathe normal and natural. You're going to notice on the inhale, there's a rise. And when you exhale, it falls. You're not visualizing this, you're actually experiencing the body sensations. Then move your awareness up to your chest and do the same. More subtle, but there's a rise and a fall. And then come to your nose and do the same. If you can, breathe through your nose. And just look real close for what's happening. Just paying attention to what is, right? It's the first mark of mindfulness. Is one nostril more predominant than the other? Is the air going out at a different temperature than the air coming in? Just paying attention, that's all you're doing, developing the mindfulness microscope. Then move over to your left shoulder and your left arm. And on your next inhalation, I'd like you to tighten that region to the count of 3. And then on your exhale, release to the count of 6. Do that now. And then do the same with your right leg. And your next inhalation, tighten that region to the count of 3. And then just release and pay attention to the body sensations. You're learning how to tighten and release body sensations to the count of 6. Cross over to your left side, same left leg. Tighten to the count of 3. Release to the count of 6. And then cross over to the right arm and right shoulder and do the same. Okay, that's good. Move awareness over to your face. And just put your awareness on your forehead. And each breath cycle come to a different location. Come from the forehead down to the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the jaw. Just intentionally releasing any muscle groups that might be tight. Become aware that you're doing it. And then move to your throat. And just release any tensions that might be there. There may be none, but there might be. This is a location in the body that often manifests when we have sadness or grief. Just learning how to release there is really helpful. And back to your chest. It's an area that often manifests angers. All of those outs. And finally, back to the belly. Belly rumbles when we get into anxiousness. So just infusing that without allowing this release. So now let's leave the body in the background. I want you to do the same with your thinking mind that you just did with the body. So you're going to use the same noticer, the same witness, same observer, and you're just going to watch thoughts that arise. Well, just to sensitize you to understanding this, I want you to right now say some words to yourself. Say some words to yourself. Pay attention to what you're doing. Now, when that happens spontaneously in your mind, we call that talk thinking. You think in two main ways. One is in talk. The other way that you think is through pictures or mind movies. So just to help you understand that, I'd like you to intentionally bring in the face of someone you know. Now, whatever representation came to you, we call that an image thought. So we've just defined for you the two basic ways that people think. Some of you will think only in talk, some of you will think only in image, some of you will think both. There's no right way. But for the next minute or two, I would like you to just, with that observer, that witness that you looked at body sensations, I'd just like you to sit back, kind of like a cat would look at a mouse hole and just waiting to see what comes up. You're just going to sit back, and as words come up, I want you to label that talk and let it last as long as it wants, but don't get involved in the content. You're just observing the form or the way right now. Similarly, you're sitting back and there might be a picture of a door, picture of whatever, and just label that image. So do not get pulled into the content, but just label. Let it last as long as it wants, and don't try to make anything happen. Just be the observer. Let's do that now, okay? Now, if you get pulled into the content, you know what to do. Just gently but firmly come back from being pulled in and just be the observer again, waiting to see if talk or image arises. And just for another 15 seconds, just renew your resolve to just be the observer of image or talk thinking. Okay, that's good. Now leave thinking in the background and just become aware of what you're feeling right now. Now, there'll be a broad range of feelings. You're just going to identify what it is for you. There's no right or wrong. Some of you could feel a relative calm compared to maybe when you started today, or some of you could be impatient, frustrated, bored, whatever. Your job is just to label what your feeling is. And some of you may be even to notice a body sensation that's happened to you as a result of that feeling. Every feeling we ever have activates the body, but right now it's early on in your skill set here, so you may not see a body sensation, but if you're relatively calm, sometimes you'll notice a loosening in the shoulders, or the whole body could be calm. Okay, that's good. So now let's just close this little exercise. I like to close all my exercises saying something like, I'm so deeply grateful for being gifted today. Just can't be grateful enough, right? And I make an intention. I'm going to be the best that I can be today. And then an intention for others. I intend to help everyone I meet today be their bests. And then just before I close, I extend myself a well-being intention. I say something like, may my life be free of suffering. May I be at peace. Just as something as simple as that. May I have more patience for somebody. Just a couple of those intentions. And then when you're ready, just open your eyes and let's just talk about what we did there. Now, I would like to just review just a touch of maybe what happened for you there. Maybe Jane, you could just let me know in the chat what's happening. I'd like you to, if you would, put in the chat, each of you, if you thought mostly in talk, or did you think mostly in image, or did you think mostly in both? Just give us some feedback on what that experience was for you.
Images, more images, images, both. Both. Still images, some talk, 50-50, had a movie going on.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay. So most of you would have been able to respond one way or the other to that question. Now, you may not realize it, but something very, very significant happened to you at that time during that exercise. You see, the mindless person goes through their entire life thinking they are their thoughts. You have a thought and you act on it. You have a thought and you want to replace it with another thought, and that happens. What you just did was experienced a part of you that proved to you beyond any doubt that you're not your thoughts. Because if a part of you could watch image or talk arising, there's a part of you that actually saw that. That means that you're not your thoughts. What's the significance of that? You learn to do that with your feelings as well. So if you look at emotional hijacks that you have when you have just been patient, whatever it is, this is what's happening. You will never have an emotional hijack to any extreme when you are the witness of what's happening. When you can say, oh, there's a tight shoulder, there's a rumbling gut, there is image, there is talk, there is anger. When you can bring yourself through your consciousness raising, be able to observe these phenomena that are happening, they no longer become you and they do not drive you. All the things you may have heard about mindfulness, it breaks down to that the more conscious we are, and we have to, of course, be in that moment to be conscious, but the more conscious we are of BFIT, the acronym is body sensations, feelings that we're having, and image and talk, the two ways we think, we call it BFIT mindfulness. The more conscious you are with that, the less your brain, your amygdala that just wants to fire and take over, that part of you that pulls you into these emotional hijacks, those power struggles, all that's mindless stuff. That's all stuff the way we typically drive our car. When you practice this sufficiently, you're going to start to be in these moments and you're actually going to see a thought arising around impatience. And you're going to be able to say to yourself, there's a thought of impatience, instead of I'm impatient, or not even knowing you're impatient, just being impatient, just saying things that you don't intend, or the likes of that. So that's a very, very significant benefit that's going to come to you if you practice this skill set. Number two, for any of you that had any degree of calm in the exercise, and some of you would definitely have had some calm, I'm not saying full calm, but some calm. Maybe some of you didn't, you were wondering what's going on, but if you do this again once or twice in your own private home for 10 minutes, you'll find that you will be calm. When you do that with the brain gets calm. Here's what happened if you felt a touch of calm, or when you do this next time, you feel any calm, and it gets deeper and deeper. But any degree of calm, this is what the neuroscience tells us. This is Dr. Richie Davidson from the University of Wisconsin, and numerous others have done it. Davidson did it 10, 12 years ago to start it. But this is what would happen. When you do this and you're in functional MRI, here's what we would have seen. If you were calm during that or at the end of that, we would have seen your medial prefrontal cortex lighting up. In 10-minute exercise, you activated your medial prefrontal cortex. And that means that you wired neuron cells into that part of your brain. Because what fires wires, what fires wires, what fires wires. And you've seen just from our little time today, the power of the medial prefrontal cortex. Now the brain's complicated and there's lots more parts, but these are the main pieces that drive a lot of our not caring for ourselves. I think you can start to see that the more of this you do, you're going to be caring at the deepest level of our being, because we're not going to let the amygdala set off all that cortisol and all of that, the adrenaline and all of the problems we have that can happen to us with anxieties. And we're not going to let all of these neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA get chewed up and therefore fall into depressions, either small depressions or even the big ones. Just by doing that activity, 10, 12 minutes a day. Number three, if you were to do that for a total of 25 hours, now it gets incremental. I mean, you start to develop cells really early on within hours. But if you hung in for a total of 25 hours, say over the next 3 months or so, 10, 12, 15 minutes a day, you would activate the parasympathetic nervous system, because you being calm, you had your parasympathetic system, that's the system of cooperation, calming, all that. You activated that just for that 10 minutes. You did that yourself. But if you were to do a total of 25 hours and then top it up each day with, say, 15 minutes of that, you would spend your whole day with some of your parasympathetic system turned on. And the parasympathetic system is that which manifests your best self. When you are there, You can be unconditionally compassionate. You can even learn to love the unlovable, forgive the unforgivable. That's how it happens, by developing these parts of our brain that have been evolving for like thousands and thousands of years. And the more you grow this, it'll just naturally start to come to you like that. Jane, let's go back to the deck, and I'd just like to run through a couple more slides. As Jane's getting that up, if you can just listen while she's getting that up, a very important understanding as well is that when you get to that stage of what we're just talking about, you will start to see that body sensations, feelings, and image and talk thinking are just sensors, just like smell, touch, and taste are. When you start to see those parts of who you are, just as there is anxiousness, there is anger, there is whatever, they don't hold you and drive you the same way. Give us the next slide, Jane. Just go through that slide to the next slide. Okay, so I'd just like to stop on this one and just give you one more really concrete, tangible way to understand what you've just done. It's that quote that I offered you earlier. It's the mind and only the mind that determines the quality of one's life. So just to really understand this in concrete terms, imagine yourself the last time you watched Netflix or a movie or YouTube or something like that. And it was a situation that brought you into a certain feeling, sadness or anxiousness or impatience, whatever it was. And the cast of characters and the director, with you watch them, have brought you to this emotional state, which is what cast of characters and directors are paid for, right? Now, imagine yourself watching that situation, having that feeling, and the phone ringing, or your device going off, or someone saying, "Hey, Peter, what's for lunch?" or something. And it totally broke your concentration to the point you said, "Oh, this is just a movie." Right? Sooner or later, when we get emotionally brought into an up state or a down state, eventually we say, "Oh, that was just a movie." And you notice how the intensity of that feeling just plummeted because, oh, it's just a movie. This is what happens in the movie of life when you're mindful. When you're mindful in the moment of, let's say, supporting someone, a child or an adult, whatever, and you start to get pulled into an emotional hijack, bordering on getting into a power struggle, whatever else. To the extent that you can be conscious that you're there in that moment, pay attention to what's happening, find a body sensation someplace and infuse it with allowing this release I taught you. When you can do that, it's just like when you are pulled out of the movie at the Netflix. This way you're pulled out of the movie of life that your primordial brain's trying to lock you in, and you become complete in that moment. Your A game manifests. That's how we show the real love for the people we're supporting and our ultimate best self, right? And trust me, this is only a couple hours away from you to start to practice this when you do it. On my website, there's the 11-minute you just did, there's 20, there's 30, there's all kinds of, go to our website, centerforconsciouscare.ca, resources, guided mindfulness, and you'll have a whole litany there. And you could just stick with that guidance. Give us the next slide then, Jane, and let's just put this out, and there may even be a question or two in a second. But here's the following 5 ways that I promised you how we accomplish radical changes to nature, nurture, and normals kind of PFP programming. So this part of self-care that we've taught you this morning, this thing called mindfulness, this is how this part of self-care will take you into more consistently being who you want to be manifesting and how you want to be. So the first of these benefits that come from this practice is we have a reminder of being in prison. So you don't do this very long before you start to realize, oh my gosh, there I am pulled into that. Oh my gosh, there's that. Oh my gosh, there's my self-righteousness again. There's my judgmentalness. There's my, yeah. You just start to realize, you start to see many, many moments in the day when your PFP brain is calling the shots. But you see, you are not your PFP brain. This is who you are. If you're not conscious, you are it. That's the PFP that drives most of the world. Want to know where all the world's suffering is coming from at this very moment, and it's come from for eons? It's this. It's being locked in, not knowing that there's a part of us that can grow. And different traditions call it different things. Some people call it mindfulness, consciousness, the soul, wisdom. You call it anything you want, but there's a part of all of us that we can cultivate to not be driven into these primordial forces. So firstly, mindfulness reminds us that our mind has a mind of its own, and that when we are only semi-conscious, like how we drive a car, our PFP, not the mindful us, but our PFP is making many poor choices. And you start to see that. You get that. And you get that time and time and time again. And you start to say, that's not who I want to be. I didn't want to yell at that person. I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to have more patience. I didn't want to be as gossipy. I didn't want to. You start to get it, right? And I'm not knocking self-help books that are just telling you not to do it. But it's the same with, with some of the strategies we've got in our sector to teach, some of the NBI kinds of tell you to stay calm when you're doing various, interventions. It's not good enough. You have to learn how to be calm. Just wanting to. Like, we have very little willpower unless we're conscious. We just don't have willpower unless we're conscious. All right. So give us number 2, if you would, Jane. Number 2, we have awareness right now of a more optimal response. So the mindful me has a much greater likelihood of not being semi-consciously driven to behave in accordance with that old PFP nurture nature stuff, right? So it's the initial thoughts that'll come up through this programming that we've had, but that's not us. The more conscious we become in the moment, we can immediately rethink more optimal responses than initially offered by our PFP. So the process that we teach in the course is we teach you how to catch yourself in the moment. Everyone right now become aware that you're listening to me. That's that catch moment. We teach you how in the moment calm, just the catching is calming, but we teach you also how to calm yourself. And then to be able to clarify the needs. You see, unless you can catch yourself and be calm in the middle of stress, and every supporter I'm talking to has many moments, even many moments each day, that are potentially going to pull you into hijack. And here's the problem. When PFP drives the show, our IQ drops to like single digits. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but we can't think clearly. You've likely walked away from situations and saying, did I say that? Why did I do that? Well, you didn't do it. This did it. You, who you really are, you did not do that. PFP did it. But unless you're prepared to develop this part of you, you'll die walking away from someplace saying, who did that? So the power of being conscious just cannot be overstated. Just can't be. So the more conscious we become and rethink more optimal responses than initially offered by PFP. We catch, calm, clarify, and then we connect. We connect in ways I call conscious connecting. We connect. This is not ego to ego. It's not mom to child. It's not supporter to person supported. All of those, this and that, those dualities, they are not really reality. What is real is that, as I said in that poem just before we broke, the I becomes we, this place of usness. And all the wisdom traditions talk about this place of oneness, universal, universe, one verse, right? Our language is loaded with, we are not separate. We are when we are conscious. There's a tradition in the East that talks about saying a word called namaste. People will greet each other in India saying namaste. And every spiritual tradition has got this. What does namaste mean? It says, I honor the place that when you're in that place and I'm in that place, we are one. Isn't that a neat way to greet somebody? Instead of, how are you, man? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either, but I honor the place that when you're in that place and I'm in that place, we're one. That's conscious connecting. We just learn to connect, and we enough, and you start to live this. This is the way you become. Right now, the skills to learning how to do it is like playing tennis or anything else. We have to practice. But the more we practice, the more we become this. This is how we start to be able to be in situations. I've likely in my career blocked more punches than any of you ever will, because I choose to work with people who have got unmet complex needs. And I haven't for 10 years had, I think, one scintilla of change in my heart rate or my heart rate in terms of my openness and blocking punches. You just find yourself doing it with an open heart. You don't have to think through, oh, this person's got disability and they likely had this upsetting. No, you just connect. And by the way, this is what brings people to calm faster than anything. I started off my chat about this. We care for ourselves like this, and people get calm. They just get calm, right? Just being in our presence. You've likely had that yourself. You've been in the presence of people that are just calm. You say, I don't know what it is, but they just make me calm. They just make me feel my best. Here's what you're talking about, someone who's likely conscious. Number 3, Jane, if you would. So this is the catch, calm, clarify. Just populate that slide, if you would, Jane. And each of these steps we teach, and then once again on the site you can see how to do that. And then finally, through conscious connecting, we can now care competently and compassionately. Next, Jane. Now this is really cool. I've been talking to you all morning about this part of the brain that just is there doing its thing. You know, we've inherited it for tens of thousands of years. The amygdala, the medial frontal cortex. The amygdala, by the way, is firing every 3/5 of a second until we die. Every 3/5 of a second, the amygdala is saying, and you're not asking it to do that. It just does that. Is this safe? Is this where it should be? Doing it, you know, it's always checking things out, right? And so is the medial frontal cortex. But this is what happens to that live drive. We're calling out the live drive. As we mature and befit wisdom and kindness and intrapersonal skills, the PFP live drive seems to be upgraded to a more complete version. Like even our autopilot becomes the 2.0 version of it. Isn't that so cool? So even those thoughts, feelings, and actions are now more aligned with more conscious, ideal self, me. That's what starts to happen. So you literally can program that part of us that we're not even cognitively. See, cognition really is a bit of a shmoo. We give it so much credibility. Oh, thinking, you know. Most people don't have control of what they're thinking anyway. Like, you know, thinking is really important, right, in terms of our life. But you know that I'm saying to you, you don't know what your next thought's going to be. You have thoughts happening all day long and you don't want them. You can't turn them off when you want to. And these thoughts that you have all day long, if I ask you to share any thoughts, if we put all the thoughts you had yesterday on a good computer with a good password, you wouldn't share the password with anybody, because many of those thoughts you had yesterday or the day before, whenever, they're not you. They were there. They were survival reproducing you. This is who you really are. The more you cultivate this. This is where ultimate self-care comes from, right? So we actually change this whole process. Next. Those thoughts and feelings are not me. We are just naturally more and more mindful. The mindful me, the noticer, the witness, less and less identifies the thoughts and feelings as me. This results in consistently manifesting our highest level of competence, calm, and care for all others. And finally, Jane. So wisdom and authentic kindness with sufficient time, focus, sensory clarity, and allowing, which is what you just did. We took you through a little exercise, a focusing exercise. You clarified some of your thinking through this sensory door, not cognitive door. And you learned this release, that's that allowing us. The BFIT starts to self-organize into emerging wisdom and usness, authentic kindness. Give us the next slide, if you would, Jane. So I just want to show you in real time how this works as you do this, okay? So the untrained person, as good as you want to be, as good as your intentions are, and many of you have had wonderful upbringings, obviously that's why you're to training like this, because you're very significantly far along the path I've been talking about. I'm sure much of what I've talked about this morning, you're already there. But let's assume that there's a time in someone's life when they're, and people who have not really worked on themselves as you have and as you intend to be. In terms of this mindfulness, we're talking about this optimal self-regulation that comes from self-care. You don't do this level of self-care. And in situations, there'll be no awareness at the time or after the situation of being emotionally hijacked. You'll be in a situation that's really got under your skin, bothered you, and it'll just happen. And even afterwards, you don't even know that you could have been any better. I'm talking about the majority of the population. I mean, good, caring people as best they can be, but not conscious, driving their lives like they drive their car, right? God love us all. I mean, I'm not in any way being derogatory. I'm just saying that we can be so much more. And many people will do the work I'm advocating, by the way, for their child or for the person they're supporting. Many people won't do it for themselves, but they'll do it for their loved ones. It's really interesting. Anyway, number 2 on this scale, let's say you've grown somewhat. There's a late awareness after the situation of having been an emotional hijack, but with some understanding of what went wrong and better intentions for next time. That's incredible growth process. When you can at least be aware, and I'm sure everyone who's listening to me right now is having these experience. Maybe not at the time, but afterwards, you say, gee, I think some of that problem was me. It wasn't just them. That's a beautiful growth step, right? And it comes through different doors. Mindfulness is one of the main ways to get there. Then in the middle, look at this one. At the time, there is some awareness of being emotionally hijacked. You're actually in the hijack and you're aware you're being hijacked. If I were to ask each of you now, how long does it take you to become aware that you're in a hijack when you're not, typically? Some of you say, oh, I'm there right off the bat. Well, some of you will be, but many of you think you are, but you're not because you're not sufficiently conscious. So in the moment, you're aware that you're there and the trigger's cocked and you pull it, and you're still not your best self. But at least in the moment of a hijack, you were there. You knew you were there with an intention to learn how to be, even in that moment, more releasing. Then we go to that second last step. At the time of the situation, there is some awareness of being emotionally hijacked. That's that catch. With some in the moment, mindful emotional self-regulation skills and kindness, and therefore a lessening of the emotional hijack. In the moment, you're able to handle some of it without getting pulled in, hijacked. And finally, the more of this practice you do, at the time of the situation, there is ongoing awareness and mindful self-regulation of be fit, including insights, awareness, and skillful communications that are useful, ethical, timely, and kindly. Those are the 4 big ones for behaviors and speech, right? Therefore, there is no emotional hijack, and there is catch, calm, clarify, consciously connect, and compassionate care. That's what can come out of this. And we're not talking a lot of time at it. Practicing, say, 20, 25 hours, and you'll measurably see changes in this stuff. Next slide, then, if you would. So just this next piece, I'm just going to just go for a little up here. Use mindfulness to create distance between thoughts. And I want to end on this next slide because it's such a precious little slide. Sums up a lot of what I've been talking about. Using mindfulness to create distance from thoughts. So as we said to you, the untrained person will say, I'm not enough. I'm angry. I'm upset with them. I'm this, I'm that. The conscious you will, 1, keep your upper brain online so you don't know what to do, to distance yourself, to protect yourself, to make social change, whatever has to happen. But at the moment, I notice that there's a thought or an image or a talk that I'm not whatever, right? It just makes such a difference. So I know that's our time. They go so fast on us. Jane, just come back to taking off the screen for a second, if you would. Is there just maybe a minute or two if we have Jane, anything come through, any chat you'd like a comment on, or are we up to our time? How are we doing?
There isn't anything in the chat and there aren't any hands up. So I think that we really have gleaned a lot of very important information. Just one quick comment, how important and how this is really becoming, we used to think that this was kind of a trendy thing. I work with a person who works in the Federal Department of Defense in the Finance Department, which is
Yes.
all numbers. It's just numbers and federal defense.
Yeah.
Huge training in mindfulness. And he said to me, I am working at retraining my brain.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
so the importance of this and how far it's spreading in terms of the importance, can't emphasize enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful ending, Jane. I can't do any better than that. Okay. Just thanks everybody for tuning in today. Okay.